All right, guys, welcome back to the third video in the Unit 4 Outcome 1 series, which actually covers 3 key knowledge dot points. And this one is all about something called Lewin's force field theory. Okay, here is our study design, and all of that stuff we are going to cover off in this video. And the reason we do this in the one video, see the first key knowledge dot point there says key principles of the force field analysis theory. And then it says driving forces and restraining forces. The driving forces and restraining forces are part of the theory. So it makes sense just to kind of cover it off all in one lump. So that's what we're going to do. And then that leaves us just one final key knowledge dot point to cover in the fourth and final video for the series. All right, so what is this all about? Okay, Lewin's force field analysis theory. Okay, now when businesses are looking to make changes, so again, put your mind in the context of this is all about change. Okay, business is changing. So when businesses are looking to make changes, it makes sense that they make themselves aware before they make those changes of things that are going to make the change easier, and then maximize those, and be aware of the things that could get in the way of the change happening and work to minimize those. Remember in the last video, the first video of the series, when we talked about the concept of change, we said managing change is a difficult process, and largely because it involves people changing, and people don't like to change and they'll be resistant to change. There's other issues as well, but that's kind of an example. So if you want to make change, there's going to be things that are going to smooth the way, make things easier, but there's things that are going to block the path of that change. So all this theory is saying, you want to be aware of both sets of things, exploit the things the most you can that are going to make the change easier, and somehow manage to overcome the things that are going to make the change harder. Okay, so to do this guy, Kurt Lewin, he developed the concept of the force field analysis. Okay, he called the forces that were pushing the direction towards the change driving forces, and the forces that were working against the change and keeping the business in its current state restraining forces. Okay, so he represented those actions with a diagram, and there's various versions of, if you Googled this theory, you'll see lots of things, but this is a really nice simple version of it. Okay, so we've got our proposed change. That's what we're working towards. We want to get to the position in the middle there, which is our changed position. So you've got the forces for it and then the forces resisting it. Okay, that represents this. If you visualize this diagram, this kind of makes this, I think, easier to understand. Now, the idea is that for a change to be successful, the total driving forces must outweigh or be stronger than the total restraining forces. So it's like a tug of war, if you like, or a push of war. Okay, if the driving forces do not outweigh those restraining forces, or even if there's an equilibrium, the change you're trying to make happen is unlikely to be successful. Okay, so far I think that is fairly logical, makes sense. So the idea is that by carrying out this analysis, going through this process before moving ahead with some kind of change project, managers can assess whether or not the change is even worth investing time and money to. Because you might go through this process, you carry out the analysis we're going to look at, and you actually go, look, there's too much in the way of this. Okay, it's just not going to happen. Okay, there's things that are going to help us along the way, but there's just too many barriers to this going to happen. Let's not even bother, and then think of a different route altogether. Okay, that's kind of the point. That's why you do this before you carry out the change process. So the benefits to going through this process, again, that's a question that can easily be posed. So what's the benefits of going through the force field analysis process? First off, you can identify and analyze the forces for and against the change. In other words, the driving forces and the restraining forces. It helps you make an informed decision, like I was just talking about whether the change is actually even worth pursuing at all. It then allows you to develop some strategies to overcome the restraining forces. So, for example, very simple example, if resistance from staff is one of them that you identify, some training might help you overcome this. It might be as simple as that. It then lets you start creating some actions and timelines to kind of get the change process going. And finally, it identifies the stakeholders who might be supportive of the change. Those would be driving forces, those that are going to help, and then those who might resist it. So it might be groups of people, it might be individual people, depending on the situation, the type of business, the size of the business. But if you can identify the stakeholders who are going to support and help drive the change forward, it would be really useful to know who they are so you can kind of exploit those to the max. And if you can identify who the resistors are going to be, it allows you to really focus certain strategies on them to help them overcome their resistance so they become less of a restraining force than they might otherwise be. Okay, so that's the benefits of actually going through this process. In terms of how it might look, the process you might actually go through, it's simply what you got here in the green on the left of what you're looking at is some driving forces, on the right, the restraining force, and the changes in the middle. So in other words, if the change we are considering, okay, we're looking at the option of implementing an automated production line in our business. Okay, that's the change this example demonstrates. So on the left, we've identified our driving forces. Now, again, don't worry about too much because we'll talk specifically about driving and restraining forces shortly. But increased profit is a driving force for this. Increased productivity. Those should make sense to you already, having done operations management. Reduce long-term costs, because it's reducing the wage bill. Generate economies of scale. So this is a very simplified version, okay? Obviously, it would look much more complex, but this is just to get the idea across. So we've got our driving forces there. These are the things that are driving the change. Okay, these are the reasons that we're trying to make the change. This is what's behind the change. Then on the right, we have the things that are potentially going to get in the way, which we will be calling restraining forces. So the high initial setup costs, again, we know that from one of our disadvantages of the implementation of automated production lines when we did operations management. One of the big disadvantages is the cost of implementation, the loss of jobs, potentially causing industrial action. Again, we looked at loss of jobs as a disadvantage of automated production lines. And maybe lack of space in your current facility. Maybe you don't physically have the room to install what you want to install. That's going to be a big barrier. So then you've identified, the driving and the restraining forces. And then what you do basically is go through a process of kind of giving them a weighting. Okay, because the idea is, you've got to work out which is going to be greater. And once you've kind of given everything a weighting, you could kind of add up all the scores on one side, add up all the scores on the left. And very simplistically, if the numbers on the left outweigh the numbers on the right, then you go, okay, there's a chance that this could then happen, so it's worth pursuing. But if the numbers on the right far outweigh the numbers on the left, you'd probably already be thinking, well, maybe this is not the route that we want to be taking. Okay, so very, very simplified version, but just to give the idea of a process that you can actually go through. And hopefully that makes some sense to you. So now what we're going to do is actually move on to the next two key knowledge dot points in the three. The first one was driving forces. Now the study design identifies 11. Again, that's why this video is a little bit long, because there's so much stuff in here. So it identifies 11. Once again, like with most things in this course, these are not the only 11 driving forces that might exist, but these are the 11 identified in the study design. These are the ones that you can be questioned on, and these are the ones which could be used to answer any question that they could throw at you. So I would suggest, again, you don't go further than these, not 10, it's actually 11. So driving forces. So these are the forces to define driving forces. They're the forces that initiate, encourage, and support change. A really good, simple definition of them for you. Right, now, we're just going to go through the ones on the study design. So the first one identified is owners. Now, owners, their primary interest in the business is the success of the business, obviously. Okay. Now, for businesses that are owned and run by their owners, so in other words, partnerships, sole traders for sure, the owners are directly responsible for the overall performance of the business. Okay. They need to ensure that they've anticipated and acted upon any trends or developments that could directly impact on their business. Now, shareholders are also owners of incorporated businesses, okay? And they therefore have a direct financial stake in the business. They want to perform, or they want the business to perform to maximize their return on investment. Now, they're not necessarily directly involved in the running of the business, but they're interested is to get the maximum amount of money out of the business that they possibly can. So either way, whichever the scenario we're looking at, whether it's a smaller business, which is a sole trader, or a partnership, or even a bigger partnership, or it's a huge multinational company, limited company, a public company, whatever type of business we're talking about, there's going to be constant pressure from the owners to maximize the performance of the business. Okay, so that's the pressure, to maximize the amount of money that's being made, maximize the performance. Simple as that. Managers. Okay, so the second driving force identified in study design. Now, managers obviously play a key role in the business because their focus is to ensure the business performance is optimized and to make sure that any objectives that have been set are achieved. That's their job, okay? Managers' job is to achieve the objectives, or to make sure the objectives are achieved. Now, they are also critical to the success of change. They're going to be leading the change. And in a smaller business, they might be involved in the whole process, the whole change process, in a very hands-on way. Okay, for larger businesses, top-level management might not be so hands-on. So again, it depends on what type of situation, what type of business we're talking about. Now, when a manager is in support of a proposed change and they have really strong leadership skills, they can really be responsible for and encourage a successful change implementation. Okay, one way they do this is by setting an example for others to follow, so leading by example. As they are also an employee, so managers are also employees, they're just employees with responsibility, they may also be concerned with their job security. So they can be driven by both their approach to the management role, but also their own personal interests in what they get out of the business as well. So managers are a really powerful, or can be a very powerful, driving force. One thing that's interesting, you're also going to see when we look at the restraining forces, managers appear in there as well. There's in fact a few of the driving forces which appear in both lists, because that depends on kind of how it plays out in that scenario. But in terms of them being a driving force, if they have the right motivation and if they have the right skills, then they can be a really, really powerful driving force for change. Okay. And look, in terms of managers and change management, it's such a hugely important area now, like a lot of what managers do, because change, remember there was a saying we came across in an earlier video, change is constant, because change is always happening. Such an integral part of a lot of managers' roles these days is managing change, because that's always happening. There's now courses, there's degrees in change management. And in fact, there's actual jobs now, change manager. So if you Seek, if you pumped in change manager, there's hundreds and hundreds of jobs, very well paid jobs as well. So it normally sits under the human resources umbrella. It's kind of a specialist type of human resource person that specializes in taking people through change. But yeah, there's courses, there's degrees. And again, this didn't used to exist. This is a fairly new thing. But just shows the importance of managers having the skills, the abilities, and the empowerment to actually manage change processes. Third driving force, employees. These are a vital ingredient to business success. We looked at that right when we started looking at human resource management. The first key knowledge dot point there was about the relationship between managing employees and achieving objectives. And the whole point of that is, well, one of the points of that is that you're only ever going to achieve your objectives through your employees. They're the ones that are really achieving them. So they are clearly a vital ingredient to business success, because they're the ones that are doing the work that is going to achieve the business's objectives. Now, as with business owners and managers, they also have a personal interest in the performance of the business, because the business gives them a job and an income. Yeah, so they've got this personal kind of connection too. But they might also be more focused on their own working conditions, so they can place demands on the business to change conditions, training, wages, benefits, that sort of thing. So that's kind of one way in which employees can become a driving force. So basically, employees can really be a strong driving force for proposed changes to improve their work environment, but also maybe to improve processes within the business, that helps them do their job more effectively, more efficiently, to find ways, to do their job better. Okay, often employees are looking for ways in which to do their job better. So look, from lots of different ways, employees are really key. A key driving force, from within the business, something you always need to be taken into account and taken aware of. And look, in a case study, if the driving force was from the employees, the language used, the context is normally pretty obvious. So here's just a couple of examples. Again, I pick up from the media. Again, this is recorded mid-June 2023. So this is some recent stories. Banks push for office return amid productivity woes. And then the second article, the death of working from home. Data shows bosses want an end to flexible work arrangements. So look, the whole thing here, the whole flavour. There's been a lot in the press. Look, since COVID, when people were working from home, were forced to work from home. Look, before that, everyone, most people went to the office 5 days a week. I'm not talking about, if you have a white collar job, you went to the office 5 days a week, 9 to 5, 8 till 6, whatever. That was kind of your life. Okay, there was in recent years a bit of a push for flexibility, working arrangements for things like people with young families that needed a bit of flexibility around looking after the kids and picking them up to and from school and stuff. But essentially, work was done in the office. Obviously, in COVID, no one went to the office. Everyone was working from home. People then became, obviously at first everyone was, oh my God, we're in lockdown. You don't want to get out. But interestingly, kind of since COVID, a lot of people became used to working from home. People didn't have to spend an hour each day commuting to the office, getting on the train and going into the CBD. So there's a couple of hours a day saved. It allowed them flexibility. Look, for a lot of reasons, a lot of people now actually really enjoy working from home. And there's been a pushback from employees to stay working at home. I know a lot of people now that work from home either exclusively or 3-4 days a week, and then they just go into the office 1 or 2 days a week. So it's a pretty common thing. And the employees are the ones that are kind of trying to push back. So what this is all about is a lot of bosses are now not happy with this situation, because some of them, not all of them, some of them feel that productivity has taken a bit of a hit. Other bosses and other employees argue the opposite. They say they're more productive at home. But look, there is a push from certain businesses now to get people back in the office. So that's what this is all about. Employees are driving to stay at home. Bosses are kind of pushing for them to come back. So this is just an example of, I guess, managers and employees both being some kind of a driving force and a restraining force for change when you look at there's two sides to this coin. Driving force for competitors. Being in business is all about being in competition. Yeah, all businesses are competing against other businesses, and a brand new, never seen before type of business probably soon will be, because if a business enters, starts up and becomes successful, you're soon going to get other businesses entering that market and doing the same thing too. So really, you're always in competition. So it is essential that at all times you are aware and across of what your competitors are doing, so that you can either stay ahead of them or respond to any changes that they make as quickly as you can. Okay, now what makes this even more complex is that for an increasing number of businesses, those competitors now can be located anywhere in the world. Okay, like if you're a retailer, kind of pretty much of any description. I guess maybe perishable goods, not so much so. I mean, it depends on the shelf life of these things, but for non-perishable goods, I can now order pretty much any product on Amazon from anywhere in the world, and it'll arrive at my front door within a couple of days, maybe a week. So local retailers are up against that. Okay, so that's been a big issue for retailers in Australia. Now, changes might be in response to pricing, advertising campaigns, new products, new technology, new ways in which people can access products. Whatever it is, fundamentally, any business that doesn't maintain competitiveness is likely to fail, clearly. Like any sports team that doesn't, remain competitive, they're going to end up at the bottom of the ladder. It's exactly the same score. I guess what makes this interesting now is because of the nature of the internet and globalisation, this has all become much, much more of an issue for a lot of businesses, which a few years ago, it kind of wasn't so much so, when everybody's competing against Amazon and eBay. An example here, the classic battle, Samsung, Apple, right? Always battling, to hit the mobile phone market. Once a year, Apple release the new iPhone, and then once a year, Samsung, and they're constantly looking at the features and what they offer. And, Samsung release a phone, the next iPhone is going to try and outdo that one. Then the next Samsung phone outdoes the iPhone. It's just a constant trying to stay ahead of the competition. And I guess the reason those two are the key ones, because you can see, again, we saw some of these charts actually in the last video. Global smartphone market share. This is for over a couple of year period. Samsung and Apple are the two at the top of the tree there. Okay. So they're the two leaders. In fact, I thought their share would be bigger than what it is, but there you go. But they're still the two leaders in the mobile phone market. I guess actually what's interesting when you look at this is that Apple, have they come ahead? So there's been a bit of a change, a bit of a shift. I mean, always similar, but so as of Q1 2023, which would have ended March 2023, almost level. And both businesses would be absolutely aware of this, and they're constantly grappling for share. Think about the global mobile phone market. I don't know the value of that, but it would be hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars, if not trillions. A 1% take in market share is worth a huge amount of money. So this is really, really important to those businesses. So point being from this perspective is be aware of your competitors and constantly try to be outdoing them. Driving force 5, legislation. Okay, all businesses must remain compliant with all laws and regulations from all three levels of government, local, state, federal, that apply to their type of business. Now, we mentioned this right when we were introducing the concept of change, and I gave some examples of reasons business need to change. I said then, these laws are not static. They're constantly being amended. There's new laws being introduced to take account of new situations that happen in life, the ever-changing business and general world landscape. Business owners who fall foul of the law can face substantial fines and even prison terms in certain circumstances. So here's an example. This is from June 5th, 2023. A major crackdown on weak employers who exploit workers. So tough new regulations are going to be enforced in a bid to stamp out the widespread exploitation of one group of workers. And if you read further down, there's a little, I didn't put the whole article in, but it's talking about migrant workers who over a number of years, there's been some issues with this particular group. So Australian employers have been warned they face a 2-year prison sentence if migrant workers are exploited under a fresh government crackdown. Okay, so there's some reforms coming in, introduced federal parliament within weeks. So if you are a business owner, particularly if you are the type of business who employs migrant workers, then you need to be aware of these changes, because it says exploit, but it depends what it means. It depends what these new regulations are. But basically, you need to be aware of them, and that might drive you to change the way you operate. It might mean that you do things to no longer employ migrant workers. I don't know, but basically you need to be aware of it so that you can respond to and make any changes in your business you need to make sure that you stay on the right side of the law with regards to this legislation. New health and safety regulations. Here's another example. Again, this is from June. So new work health and safety legislation came into effect over the past 12 months. Crucial that businesses of all sizes and industries know what changes mean for them and their workforce. Well, that says it all. Okay, if there's new legislation around health and safety, as a business owner, as a business manager, you need to make sure that you are aware of those changes, that you're making changes within your business to accommodate those changes. Okay, simple as that. And another one here, major changes to workplace relations laws. There's been some changes to the Fair Work Act. Again, don't need to go into detail, but again, it's just another example of changing laws. Like I said, these things don't stay static. So you need to constantly be on top of any of these changes in any laws, any regulations, which can impact the way that you operate your business, so that you are aware that you might need to make changes to accommodate any of these changes. Right, driving force 6, pursuit of profit, huge one. Okay, the number one objective for most businesses is to make a profit. We know this. Profit needs to be sustained over a period of time for a business to grow or even remain viable. Okay, large businesses are under continual pressure to increase profit, particularly from shareholders who are expecting a high return on their investment. Okay, the pursuit of profit can lead to changes in products and services being offered, like either improvements to the current ones, replacing existing ones, adding to the portfolio of products offered. It might mean expanding into new markets, overseas markets, other parts of Australia, other actual markets. So, not just selling one type of product, but selling a completely different type of product to a different market, or backing out of a market. If there's a certain thing that you're selling is not doing well, you might take the decision to pull that product. Or if there's a certain country that we're not performing well in, you might decide to no longer sell in that country. It might lead to cost-cutting exercises, such as making redundancies, a million changes. But pursuit of profit, a really, really high driving force for change, and the change that it leads to can look like many, many different things. Okay, a successful business is always looking for ways to increase profit, obviously. So that, I think, as a driving force for change, is kind of always sitting there in the background, driving things, moving things forward in any successful business. Microsoft earning released, revenue increased. Actually, this is a good one to point out. So, look, Microsoft, this is announcing its profit fell 12%. So that a 12% profit decrease. That's not a good thing for Microsoft. So that is going to then drive them to make some changes to obviously claw that profit back. I think the other good point this points out again, and I talked about this in the KPIs one a couple of times, and it's worth touching on again just to get the message in. Notice that it says revenue increased, but profit decreased. So again, it's another way of emphasizing this idea that just because sales goes up doesn't mean that profit is going to go up, or the other way around. Just, your sales might go down, but you can actually increase profit at the same time. So their revenue increased, but their profit decreased. Okay, so just pointing that out as well. But for the purposes of this, they released that information. Their shareholders are not going to be happy at all because they were expecting a certain level of profit, but they've got less. That's going to really be driving change within Microsoft, make changes to turn that situation around and get back to the profit levels that they were forecasting beforehand. Shares in this business, a pharmaceutical company, tumbled after it won profits. Again, same sort of idea as the one Microsoft there. It's put out a warning to its shareholders that profits are going to be lower than what they were forecasting. So it's going to make less than $186 million, blah, blah, blah. And the shares in the company fell 13%. So again, you're running the business, you make an announcement to the market that you're going to be making less money than you'd said you would. Already share price has gone down. You need to turn this situation around. So that becomes a really strong driving force for change. What do we need to do to change our business to turn this around and get back to the profit levels that we said we were going to be making, and then, get that share price to lift as well? Baby Bunting, okay, Aussie company. Shares plummet after an unprecedentedly low sales. So again, similar thing. Their shares tumbled. This was 6th of June. This is only within the last 2 weeks. Shares tumbled by 24%. That's a big drop because it was slashing its full-year profit guidance due to unprecedentedly low sales. Okay, so it's announced a big drop in profits from what it was saying, and it gives some reasons about why. But again, that's a lot of pressure on the managers of this business, with pursuit of profit being the driving force behind that, to turn this around, claw back, get the share price back up, and get those profits back up where they were expecting them to be. Driving force 7, reduction of costs. And again, remember, I'm just going through the ones in the study design. Yeah, I've got to go through the ones in the study design. Look, closely linked to the one we just did, because cost eats into profit margins. Yeah, costs and profit are closely related. Costs increase, profit goes down. Therefore, minimizing costs is also always a key objective in any business. Okay, if profit is your number one motivation or driver objective, keeping costs as low as possible is just a part of that equation. Yeah. Now, the challenge comes with not reducing costs in areas that is going to impact on the quality of the product or the service. Like in business, it's very easy to reduce costs, but can you do that whilst not reducing the quality? So think about a restaurant, okay, a high-end restaurant, okay, charges a lot of money for dinner, gets its ingredients, all its supplies from high-end producers, which cost money. Now, to save costs, they could just go, okay, we're going to get our from lower cost producers, but then the quality of the food they're serving is going to be impacted. So the key here is about reducing costs in ways that is not going to negatively impact the quality of what you're doing. That is the challenge. Okay. Changes that reduce waste, improve productivity, looking at alternative suppliers, but again, maintaining the quality whilst paying the same. Overseas manufacturing is a way to do this. Outsourcing or sourcing inputs overseas, lots and lots of ways to achieve cost reductions. They're not the only ones, but there's some examples. But always going to be a driving force in a business. Reducing costs allows you a positive impact on profits. So really, yeah, very, very similar to the profit one. Now, here's an interesting one. So this is a story from a couple of months ago. Westpac ditches cost-cutting target. It says profit margins to thin. So not too thin, to thin. So what it's saying is it's previously set some cost-cutting targets. Okay, so it said that we need to cut costs in whatever areas. But now it realizes if it does that, it's going to lead to not making enough profit, which is going to presumably piss off their shareholders, so on and so forth. So they've actually sacked off that target and kind of restated the objective. So that's kind of an interesting take on things. Inflation was pushing up costs as the 206-year-old bank abandoned the target they'd had in place for the last 2 years to bring costs down by $8 billion by 2024, but that actually increased. And that makes sense because they set a target in 2021. Now, economically, the world is a very different place in 2023. Inflation has gone up, interest rates have gone up, everything has gone up. So when they set that target in 2021 to reduce costs by $8 billion a year, it probably seemed quite doable. But we move on 2 years, it's a completely different landscape. So they've actually decided to ditch that target altogether and restate it. So that's quite an interesting take on that one. Reduction of costs. Ford Australia confirms engineering and design redundancies. Now, I know we don't manufacture the cars here for the last 6-7 years, but there still are some people employed by Ford in engineering and design. And they are making, it says there, 250 salaried employees redundant. And this is to save costs, simple as. I guess what's interesting is it offered the option to apply for voluntary redundancy package. If fewer than 250 people apply, it's possible fewer than 250 will be laid off. Again, this links back to our human resource management and termination when we talked about voluntary redundancies versus forced redundancies. That's quite interesting. You see that language being used there in a media article. Inland Rail in Queensland, hundreds of jobs to go. Could lose their jobs as the project downsizes. So the project is downsizing. They don't need as many people. They need to reduce costs. Okay, exposing mistakes, delays, and cost blowouts. So the costs are blown out. They need to rein some of that in. So the way they're going to do it is hundreds of jobs. Okay. Driving force 8, globalisation. Now, I'm giving you a definition of here. Now, this has cropped up a little bit over year 11 and 12, but just to redefine it here, so you've got a good definition, because it's important that you can define what globalisation is. Okay, the process by which people and businesses around the world are becoming more interconnected, allowing for increased international trade and cultural exchange. Look, there's lots of different definitions. I think that's a pretty standard and easy one to kind of grasp. Lots of reasons it's happened. But basically what it means is that more and more businesses these days are operating on a global scale, either selling to overseas markets, sourcing stuff from overseas, manufacturing overseas, outsourcing overseas, all of that stuff. There's strategies now available to businesses. On the other side, it also means that Australian businesses are now also competing with other businesses from around the world in a way which they didn't do previously. Again, I was talking about this just before about, a local retailer that is selling a non-perishable good. You're pretty much competing with the rest of the world now, because people could go and buy stuff from anywhere very easily with a few clicks on Amazon, eBay, or whatever. So there's definitely some advantages and disadvantages. There's both sides to this whole idea of globalization in business, from a business's perspective. Now, some of the driving forces behind the changes around globalization have come from an increase in free trade agreements between Australia and other countries. Okay, now, free trade agreements, not sure if I put that, but let me just briefly explain what they are. You don't need a lot of detail, but basically what free trade agreements do. Essentially, when there's trade between countries, there's tariffs and taxes that apply to those goods, okay? That's always been the case. Now, what happens is countries set up, so two countries, so Australia and New Zealand, will set up a free trade agreement which removes those tariffs and taxes. So basically means it's cheaper to trade between those two countries. So it kind of removes one of the barriers to trade. It makes trading easier. And there's more and more. Australia are constantly trying to negotiate free trade agreements with as many nations around the world to encourage this international trade. Technology, for example, electronic communication used for accessing other businesses and customers globally. It's a pretty obvious one. The fact that you can use your mobile phone, your computer to buy from anywhere in the world, very, very simply. Increased flow and migration between countries. Australia, as of June 2023, were on target for a net migration of over 30,000 people in 2023. Net migration, in other words, the difference between 30,000 more people moving into Australia than moving out of Australia, because obviously there's a flow both ways. And I know over the next few years there's a lot of debate in government around at the moment about the number of people they're going to let come in, but the numbers are pretty high. And also the growth of trade in developing nations. They're developing nations, which once you might have called third world nations. Now, developing nations, trade is growing hugely in some of those, and it allows westernized countries like Australia to capitalise that and maybe either trade with them or produce stuff there, whatever it might be. But that's been a growing thing as well. So that's just some of the forces that have been behind this increasing globalization. Shopping on eBay, is a classic example. Okay, we can just go into eBay now, like I said before, and buy pretty much anything from anywhere around the world. And look, if you did that with Amazon, so if I have an Amazon Prime account, and Prime, it allows you to sort of quicker, cheaper delivery. I mean, I ordered something from the UK a couple of weeks ago, and it was free delivery, and it arrived at my front door literally like 4 or 5 days later. It's quite staggering. It's just all so easy. So, any business in Australia that is selling that product, competing with whoever it was that I bought it from in the UK. I can't remember because it was via Amazon. So here you go, UK trade deal delivers from today. So this is a very recent one. The Australia-UK Free Trade Agreement enters into force today. This is only 31st of May 2023. So Gold Standard Trade Deal delivers benefits for all Australians, blah, 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 and it gives you some details. So this is an example of the Free Trade Agreement that I was just talking about previously. So as of today, I guess, June 2023, over 99% of Australian products will enter the UK duty-free. Previously, there would have been tax paid on them. Include some of our key exports, so on and so forth. So it gives you a bit of detail. So that's an example of a free trade agreement. Here, Australia eyes opportunity with India's rising middle class growing population with trade agreement. So now we're also looking to do more trade with India. So India's on the cusp of becoming the world's most populous country. I think it might even have become that since 5th of April 2023. If my 7 and 10-year-old sons are anything to go by, I'm sure they told me that it had overtaken. But either way, it's close to. So Australia's current relationship with India is changing, shifted and accelerated by a recent free trade agreement signing. So again, we've got a recent free trade agreement with India, which is going to encourage more trade between those two nations. Driving force 9, technology. Technology, constantly progressing, always acts as a driving force for change. Okay, using technology to increase efficiency and effectiveness of operations. We talked about that in operations management. And if not implemented or completely disregarded, it can quickly lead to a business becoming uncompetitive, irrelevant, or potentially even obsolete. Okay, technology that impacts operations, technology that impacts communications, allows greater access to customers, changes products and services customers are looking for. Like I say, the list is endless. There's so many ways in which technology impacts business, products, the way we interact with businesses and everything. So technology is something that business owners, business managers need to constantly be aware of, and is a constant drive for change. It's funny, I've said that about so many of these driving forces, that they're kind of always there, the profit, cost reduction, technology. So many of these are constantly there, and that's the reality. There are the world is changing so quickly and so much that these driving forces, they are a constant. Change is constant. This is the reason, because all of this stuff is ever evolving, ever changing. Why Australia's EV market is surging. So the technology, car makers, if they want to capitalise in the future, they're having to look at EVs now as opposed to petrol diesel models. So technology is moving on. There's an expectation that we can access these things. There's going to be government regulation. There already is in Europe heavy regulations around diesel cars. They basically get rid of them. Same thing will happen in Australia. So, cars now are having to, go more down the EV market, and every year on year now, a high proportion of new vehicles sold are EVs. If not pure EVs, it might be hybrids or plug-in hybrids, whatever it might be. Another example there, DoorDash drone delivery, available to more Queenslanders. I'm not even sure the detail of that one, but it was just a headline that caught my eye. Again, is technology impacting? I mean, it sounds, said to someone, 10 years ago, get have your stuff delivered to your house by drone. I mean, it would just sound insane, but it's now happening even in Queensland. Driving force 10, innovation. Again, just putting a definition in here for you. Innovation is all about adopting something new or improving something that already exists. Okay, it doesn't have to mean coming up with something totally brand spanking new. It does include improvements. So this could include newer improved products or services, or newer improved production methods or techniques. Okay, so can apply to a kind of range of scenarios. Now, businesses, especially in certain markets, are under constant pressure to update and innovate their product offering. Think again, mobile phones, Apple, Samsung. Every year they release new models because the competitors are constantly trying to gain a competitive edge, and being innovative is one way to stay ahead of them. So certainly in anything technology related, this is more of a thing. Not all products are having to be updated every year, but again, you've got to apply this to whatever market, whatever type of industry that you're operating in. Now, again, I'll just put a note. This isn't just about the end product itself. The innovation can apply to modifying the business model, making changes and strategies around how you deliver the products or the services can mean lots of different things. So we're not just talking about innovating the product itself. Could be about innovating processes, how you're accessing your customers, how you're delivering to customers, lots and lots of different things. So worth just bearing in mind there. Facebook started in nearly 20 years ago now, was that 19 and a half years ago, by a 19-year-old Zuckerberg and his three mates. Look, if you've seen the film The Social Network, you'll kind of know the backstory here. At that point, value zero. It was a new startup. As of June 2023, the market capitalization basically means the value of the business, $695.5 billion US dollars. It's a lot of money to go in, from nothing to there in 20 odd years. Now, over that period of time, lots and lots of social media sites, businesses came and went. Friendster, Bebo, Vine, Orkut, FriendFeed, and many, many others. And at one point, some of these were worth a huge amount of money as well. Now, not as much as the 700 odd billion we see here for Facebook, but, people made a lot of money out of those businesses at one point, or became very wealthy, paper wealth, because the businesses were worth a lot of money, and then they disappeared. Okay, so why did Facebook go, over that period of time, just gone on and on and on? Okay, whilst these others just disappeared, went by the wayside? Because they innovated better than those competitors. Very early on, Facebook realized the addictive nature of social media, and has basically ever since worked to exploit that angle. Okay, it's constantly introducing really engaging, innovative features that people love. By now, 2023 offers news feeds, messaging, chat, voice, video calls, the ability to like, which of course the younger generation love all that, following, subscribing, marketplace has been a huge one in recent years, and other stuff. Okay, so constantly innovating. So apart from the user interface and product tweaks, Facebook repeatedly roll out new features which broaden the appeal of the platform. That's the secret. Now, when you put it that way, it sounds, so simple. But so many other businesses, those other ones, did not get that. And I guess carried on the way they were operating and didn't realise this is the way things needed to be. They've also done some specific stuff in Facebook as well. They've created a really unique culture in the workplace. So, for example, they call them hackathons, all-night sessions where programmers get together and they have a focus on building something completely ambitious and innovative and outside of the scope of their normal work. So it kind of encourages creativity. I think the idea is every now and again, some genius idea comes out of this kind of creativity, which then builds upon and might become then the next add-on to the Facebook platform. But they really focus on encouraging creativity in the workplace, get these ideas flowing to maximize all this stuff that you can see on the screen here. So innovation has been absolutely the driving force behind Facebook's success. Driving force 11, the last of the driving forces, societal attitudes. Okay, Attitudes and beliefs, values, just out there in society are constantly changing. Businesses need to ensure that they adapt and align with those changes. Now, proliferation of the internet and social media means it is easier now than ever for the community to become aware of how businesses are operating. So failure to adapt in this area can super quickly impact sales and profits. So this is something that, again, even more so than ever, businesses really need to be on top of, the idea of being relevant. Okay. So some trends that we've seen in recent years, people looking to become more healthy. Okay. So health foods, gyms, anything to do with health, there's been kind of a boom. More flexible working arrangements. Touched on it earlier. I mean, this was interesting because this was already a thing pre-COVID with, the idea that there's more and more, because the cost of housing, mortgages and rent is so much more relative to salaries than it was a generation or two ago. More and more families now have both parents going to work. So like when I was your age, back end of the 80s, 30 kids in my class at school. When I think back, there was literally only 2 or 3 of us who had mothers who worked. The standard thing was dad went to work, mum was a stay-at-home mum. Now that situation's probably reversed, okay? When my parents bought their first house, you could easily service a mortgage on my dad's wage, which wasn't a particularly high wage. You just can't do that these days. The only way people can buy houses or even rent houses is for both people to go to work. So that means more flexible work arrangements are needed to, cover those family commitments, family responsibilities. So it was already a thing pre-COVID, but like I said, with those news reports and what's been happening recently since COVID, even more pressure as more and more people want to be working from home if they can. Increase in awareness of diversity. Again, that's been huge, I'd say, in the last 5-10 years. Diversity in terms of, ethnicity and cultures, gender, in so many different ways, There's much, much more awareness out there now of these issues than there was a generation ago. And then the last one, of course, an increasing awareness of environmental and sustainability issues. I've talked about this in class before, how a lot of the terminology, a lot of the things that we talk about now weren't even a thing, when I was a teenager. But now everybody's very aware of the harm that, we're doing to the planet and, the climate issue and climate change and all that sort of stuff. People now make buying decisions based around social responsibility, which wasn't really a thing previously. So there's just like 4 areas in which society's attitude, trends, values have kind of changed. Businesses need to change to reflect these changes. Otherwise, they become irrelevant in the eyes of community, i.e. customers. So Coles to ditch soft plastic bags at checkouts by the end of June. Look, as of mid-June 2023, my local Woolies got rid of those probably about a month ago. So now we have to use those. You have to pay 25 cents for those paper bags. That's fine. The death of working from home. Again, this links, we look to that as an employee driving force, but this is also becoming a society's attitude thing. There's a big push in society in general that people want to be working from home. You've got certain bosses that are pushing against it. But yeah, this is becoming more than just an employee issue. It's becoming a big change in attitudes in society. There's been a big shift towards the want to work from home. And 10, fast food restaurants that serve healthy foods. Why are they doing that? They're not doing that to keep their customers healthy. They're doing that because that's what customers want. And if they don't respond to that want, they're going to become irrelevant, lose customer, and potentially go out of business. Simple as. Now, restraining forces. Okay, there's only 6 of these rather than 11, so we'll get through it a little bit quicker. But these are the forces that inhibit, resist, or stop change from occurring. That's your definition. 6 of them. Let's go through the same process. Okay, managers. A little asterisk, because they appear in both lists, okay, driving and restraining. So they can act as a driving force if they're behind a change and skilled enough to guide employees through it. But the converse is also true. and therefore the manager can also block the change from occurring. They may not have the skills or experience to manage people through change or to manage the change process itself. They may not believe in the change themselves, or they may be concerned about resistance from other stakeholders. It might even be that they actually don't even fully understand the change or the reasons for the change themselves because it hasn't been explained to them properly by more senior managers. The reality is, if any of those things are the case, managers then can therefore act as a restraining force against change rather than what you want, which is the driving force. Example here, Zuckerberg wants to flatten Meta's management structure, but he could be fueling staff conflicts and shadow hierarchies. So what his plan is, and if I've got in the middle there, his plan is to lay off thousands of employees, but particularly middle managers, okay, in an effort to return to a flatter organisation structure. So don't worry too much about what that really means. But my point here is, if he's making changes, which is going to result in laying off thousands of middle managers, how on board with that change do you reckon those middle managers are going to be? Yeah, so they're more than likely at that level of the business to become a big restraining force. So just to put into context how that can play out. Restraining force 2, employees, another asterisk because they appear in both lists. So again, either driving or restraining force. In terms of restraining force, we said that the problem with change is it's natural for people to feel uncomfortable and uneasy about change. And that in itself can lead to passive resistance to the change. Now, if employees actually feel the change will result in a worse situation for them, that might lead to some active resistance. But even if they're a bit uncomfortable, uneasy, passive resistance, they're not actively going up against it, but they're not exactly making things easier. Fear of the unknown, loss of identity, fear of failing, fear of being outside of your comfort zone, feeling threatened, all of these things, natural human reactions to change. And businesses have no choice but to take those emotions into account when they're implementing change and managing the process carefully. Now, how they actually do that is a bit of a focus in outcome 2, so we won't go into it there. But yeah, employees often the biggest restraining force because humans, do not like change inherently, usually. AI anxiety. Workers who fear losing their jobs to artificial intelligence. Many workers worry AI is coming for their jobs. Can we get past the fear and find a silver lining? So again, I think just the headline sums it up. But there's certain jobs out there where people are going, oh, geez, AI is getting to the point where is it going to replace me? So any change that comes to introducing that type of technology in the industry, they're obviously going to push back against because it means they could be out of a job. Now, it's going to be certain jobs more than others, but I don't know, I've done a bit of reading into this and it's quite surprising the jobs that you don't expect, that it's expected that AI is going to be able to do it in not too distant future. So there's an example. Former Twitter employees fear the platform might only last weeks. An ultimatum by Elon Musk demanding extremely hardcore working culture appears to have backfired. Now, what was this one all about? Mass resignations and morale. Basically, when Musk came and bought Twitter, he came in and made some really, really big changes very, very quickly, which did not go down well at all with a lot of employees. It's caused a lot of dramas. I mean, I don't know if this is sort of drummed up a bit, but they fear the platform only last weeks. Clearly it didn't because, 7 months later, it's still there. But there have been a lot of dramas because Musk came in and made some massive changes very, very quickly, kind of without asking anyone, without consulting anyone. Very autocratic. Did not go down well with the employees, and they've been kind of pushing back. Restraining force 3, time. This is a simple one. Is there time to make the changes that need to be made? Okay. Sometimes change has to be completed within a certain time period before a certain deadline. Okay. Now, those restrictions might be because of other restraining forces, such as legislation deadlines. So the law is going to change on such and such a date. So that gives us very much a deadline that we need to make the change in our business by. Might be financial pressures, other driving force such as competitors' size attitudes, but there might be a time restraint on it. Basically, do we have time to do what we need to do by the time we need to do it? Simple as that. Businesses that have not been proactive and therefore have not foreseen this need for change, they might struggle to implement the change in time because they're not ahead of the game. Okay. Or if they do try to then implement the change, they're kind of behind the eight ball, and then the process might be unsuccessful, and then that impacts morale within the business. So it's another reason why businesses need to be proactive with their approach to change, because that reduces the risk of time becoming an important restraining force. Okay, it gives you more time because you can get ahead of the game. You're not constantly responding and doing things last minute, but time, an important one. UAE business prepare for upcoming federal corporate tax as deadline looms. So UAE, United Arab Emirates, so we're going international here. Introduction of federal corporate tax this week, blah, 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 blah. Now they announced this tax in January 2022. This article is May 2023. So basically, businesses that were aware of this and were across, no dramas, they've had, 15, 16 months to prepare, make any changes to get ahead of the game. But any businesses that were not being proactive, suddenly they might see this and go, oh, Jesus, this is happening this week. We didn't know about this. Now, this is kind of an extreme example, like you would assume they would be across this. But just gives you an example, the difference between being proactive and reactive, and how then time either will or will not be a restraining force for you, depending on how you kind of played the game. Major deadline looms for businesses under Colorado's paid family medical. Again, the same thing. State gave businesses until May the 31st. Voters approved this program in 2020. And the program starting benefits in 2024. Contribution beginning in January. So basically, this is something which has been going on for a number of years. So if this was an issue in 2020, even if it had not been approved by then, a proactive business would at least have been aware of it and building it into potential plans for the future, and not waiting till now and having to, oh geez, we need to make accommodation, make changes to account for this change in this leave program that's been announced by the state. So again, time, a good way to get around time being a restraining force as often as possible is by being proactive. Restraining force for organisational inertia. Now this one, those two words will not mean anything to you right now. But if you do physics, might have more of an understanding. Look, organisational inertia, the lack of ability of a business to react to internal and external pressures for change as it tends to continue on its well-entrenched way. I like the third one there. These are, again, three different definitions, all of which work. Choose one, go with that. I like the third one, the tendency of business to continue on its current trajectory rather than responding to pressures for the need to make changing. The idea of inertia, like in a physics sense, not changing direction. So just this idea that keeping going the same way, the tendency of business to maintain the way they operate and not changed. So and a lot of businesses suffer from this. I've got some examples down there, Blockbuster, Nokia, Kodak. I'll come back to some examples of how that played out. But basically, once a business has been operating in a certain way for a long time in particular, it can then be really difficult for change to occur. Okay, processes and procedures often become so entrenched that this is how we do it, that it then becomes really difficult for both managers and experienced employees to kind of visualize it doing it any other way. Okay, staff become familiar and comfortable with the structures, and the level of routine can then be really difficult to change. Okay, often a change in leadership or a restructure of the business kinds of forces the issue, but outside of that, It's just very easy for busy just to keep plodding on in the same direction, doing things the same old way they've ever done, just because that's how we do it around here. That's kind of the idea of organizational inertia. Think about Nokia. Okay, what happened to Nokia? Okay, Finnish telecoms company, established 1865. You probably wouldn't have guessed that. So over 150-year-old business. Now, in the 1990s and the 2000s, so a little bit before your time, it was the most successful mobile phone company on the planet. It became the best-selling brand, catered for all segments of the market, bunch of different models, different price points, okay? It was hugely successful. If you saw a mobile phone, it was probably a Nokia, okay? They pioneered 3G and LTE technology. They continue to launch gadgets that delivered a better experience than the competitors. So, for example, the first mobile phone with a built-in camera in 2001. Revenue increased from 6.5 billion to nearly 32 billion across that 5-year period, 96 to 2001. Basically, this was a business doing fantastically, very innovative, awesome. It was named the mobile phone's global leader in 1998 and continued to dominate worldwide until 2007. Had a market share of 50% at that point. Now, if you actually think back, we looked at market share of mobile phones a little while ago, and Apple and Samsung were around in the late teens, early 20s. So much higher market share than either of those do now. It was huge. 2006, they appointed a new CEO, and instead of focusing on innovations that is going to help keep them ahead of the game, he basically decided to keep producing their traditional phones. Now, 2007, what happened is the first iPhone, so phones become like first smartphones, but they just continued to do the phones that they were doing. Apple, Samsung, and a few other brands brought out the smartphones, which were much more capable. But Nokia kind of didn't get involved in that game. They just thought they'd continue on the trajectory, which for for 10, 20 years had made them super successful. Thinking, why would we change? Well, because the game changed, and they did not stay in the game, basically. So then over time, sales dramatically decreased. Nokia ended up selling their mobile phone division. In 2014, Nokia completely refocused their biz on network equipment and service platforms, and kind of left the mobile phone game largely. Now, in 2017, there was an Android-based smartphone under the brand name of Nokia. Look, it's out there. There's been a couple since, but there's still a very, very long way from where they were at their peak. They just completely lost the direction because of organizational inertia. Let's just keep doing what we're doing. It's made us very successful in the last 10, 15, 20 years. Let's just keep doing it. But that's not how it works. You've got new entrants to the market, new technology. You can't just keep doing what you're doing because that's what's worked for you in the past. So now, in terms of numbers, I said they had 50% of the global market in 2007. 2020, the only figures I could find around this was 4% of the UK market in 2022. I guess that's probably representative in terms of global. I'm not sure, but obviously a long, long way from where they were. And in fact, looking back earlier, we had the chart of mobile phones. Nokia wasn't even in it. They would be part of the other. Whereas, of course, if we did this 20 years ago, they would be right up at the top in that chart. But they didn't even appear in the chart. So huge issues for Nokia because of didn't start with technology. Yeah, what went wrong? iPhone was released. Galaxy. They didn't believe those new competitors were a threat. They also struggled with supply. There were some delays in introduction, some new models that allowed Apple and Samsung to exploit that. This is the issue. Overconfidence, ignoring new ideas, failure to adapt and innovate, organizational inertia. Okay, so that was Nokia. So yeah, a lot of this comes down to organizational inertia. It was a very huge remember it's 150 odd year old business, very, very old, very bureaucratic. And also there would be an element of complacency there as well. When you are the market leader for a period of time, you tend to get complacent, and that can also lead to organizational inertia. Okay, failure to recognize like the new kids on the block, thinking, oh, what are you going to do to us? And just being determined to go down the same path that made them so successful in the past. So there's a little example of how this can play out. Right, Restraining Force 5 legislation, we are nearly there. Another one which sits in both lists, hence the asterisk. So as well as businesses needing to ensure they comply with laws and regulations to avoid penalties, legislation can also actually prevent a business from implementing change. Therefore, it can act as a restraining force in that way. So in other words, to overcome a legislative restraining force, a business might have to apply for licenses, permits, might have to change some contracts or agreements so they remain compliant with the law. And look, if it doesn't get that license or permit or can change a contract, it stops the change from happening, therefore it's a restraining force. So basically what we're saying here is the business might want or need to make some changes, but some of the changes might mean the business then becomes legally non-compliant. Therefore, the law can act as a restraining force in that way. So here, this is very recent. Australia, when I say recent, again, in the context of it being June 2023, Australia unveils new sanctions on Russia as Prime Minister arrives in Japan. So Australia has unveiled a raft of new sanctions against Russia in response to the invasion of Ukraine. Most countries are doing likewise, aimed at slowing Putin's war machine. So including the measures of ban on exporting machinery to Russia and Russian-controlled areas. So if you were an Australian business who was exporting machinery to Russia or planning on doing so, now legally you will not be able to do so. So in that way, legislation is acting as a restraining force for you doing what you want to do. That makes some sense. Okay, so if you're looking for new international markets, Russia was part of your plans, you're now restrained from doing so because of these new regulations, legislations, sanctions. And a sixth and last one, really probably the most simple one, okay, financial considerations. Change costs money, and sometimes a lot of it. Does the business actually have those resources at its disposal or access to them? Can it get together the funds to fund the changes that we want to make? Costs of equipment, new technology, redundancy packages. If one of the changes you need, is cost cutting via redundancy, training, a couple of examples, but change is probably going to cost you money. Can you afford it? Simple as that. Okay, you've got to make sure that you have enough funds to carry out a proposed change. If you can't, you need to explore different ways of either obtaining the funds, and if you can't do that, this is going to be a huge restraining force. When we talk about, restraining forces versus restraining force, if you just don't have the money, that puts a big blocker there. So, this can be a huge one, but a very, very simple one. That is it. Okay, so I'm going to get out of here as quick as possible. That was a very, very long video, but everything you need for 3 key knowledge dot points is in that one. Make sure you got a good set of notes. There's going to be a fairly heavy set of notes there. Look, I'll see you in the final video, the 4th and final video in the next one. Cheers for now.